work with you with the League of Women Voters.
Oh, of course. Oh, heavens, yes.
From Pennsylvania.
Yes, indeed. Whereabouts?
All regions, Caldwell, Lansford.
Anthracite.
Anthracite, the clean coal.
Between Allentown and Scranton and Wilkes-Barre.
Oh my God. I'm from Scranton, so
That's good.
we're joined at the hip. We have two things in common. Number one, we're not very smart. And number two, we know really good pizza when we see it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, we got some more coming in. There's Mrs. Kennedy.
Yeah. Is Pine Knoll hooking in?
That's the plan. I'm not physically there, so I have coordinated with somebody there to get everything logged in. So they are aware, and I'm hoping they're getting logged in at the moment.
Donnie Griffin has probably sabotaged the operation.
You might have, yeah.
So is the college back now? Are they coming back?
Well, oh yeah, I'm teaching a regular course, so and I teach on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We're basically back. I mean, we'll be back. It'll be back to normal in the fall. The one area that is sort of iffy is the auditorium, the Bradshaw Performing Arts Center, because it's inside and full. It's 700 people, so that may take a while to come back. You know what I mean? Which to many of the public is that's the definition of whether we're open or not. Is Owens? Will David Michael Wolf be doing his concerts? Will we have David Faherty? Will we have all these people? That may take a little longer because it's inside and it is a lot of people. So, but the college is going to be back to normal. I will be teaching this semester. I'm teaching on Zoom, which I actually have discovered I like a lot. I was surprised at that, but I discovered I like it a lot because I can focus when I'm talking to you. I can focus right on you, and I'm looking you right in the eye. In a room full of people, that's hard to do, but on Zoom, because each one of you would be an individual person, they all would link in with their own computers. It's easier for me to make eye contact. But it is already busier than it was a month ago. There are more students on campus, more cars in the parking lot, and so forth. Summer school is always slow, but when we start up in the fall, it'll be virtually business as usual. And unless we have happen here what's happened in Italy, where they've had to shut down again.
Yes.
So we'll have to see what happens. But if things continue to improve, which is a big if, I think, we'll be back.
Dr. Dempsey, while we're waiting for Pine Knoll to log in, why don't you tell them about what we did yesterday on campus?
Well, Donahue and I both tell them we like to have celebrations on campus. I'm a big believer in celebrations. The bad things come to you. You don't have to look for them. But sometimes it helps to look for celebrations. And we always enjoy, I don't know if you've been to the campus lately, but our courtyard out here has a beautiful large vase done by Ben Owen. I think you may know Ben Owen's pottery from up in Westmore, and it's done in his signature color, which is that dark maroon, and it's a big thing. It's beautiful, and it's a fountain. It's not doesn't go sploosh. It just sort of dribbles out. It's very, very restful. If you're out there listening to it, you can hear it. So what we do every year, as close to the first day of spring as we can, is we have an unveiling of the statue because we cover it for the winter. but we unveil the statue and we start it up and the water starts to flow. And then we have a woman on campus who many of you may have interacted with. Her name is Michelle Bauer. And for, I don't know how she got designated this, but I guess I called her Miss Spring once because she was so excited about this ceremony. And she showed up a couple of years ago wearing a garland, like, that would say Miss Wisconsin, a sash.
Yeah.
Hers said Miss Spring. So we've officially made her Miss Spring, and she has to write a poem each year. And she did a good job. I thought that was a good poem that she did.
It was amazing.
And we have some punch and cookies and so forth. So it's kind of a big deal.
But it was our first time as staff and faculty gathering together. And we were talking, Dr. Dempsey and I, before y'all got on, about the energy, how that just changed the dynamics of the campus, getting to physically see each other and celebrate together.
Rhonda Gamble, why in God's name is Rhonda Gamble on this line? Hey, Rhonda.
Danica.
Yes, ma'am.
There's an echo from Dr. Dempsey's computer. So we're hearing him
I'm hearing myself.
Yeah.
And Heather.
Let me see if I mute myself, if that helps as well.
So yours is actually fine. It's only when
It's coming to me from you, though. You are echoing when I hear you.
I can hear you, but it's like a vibration. So
Danica, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Let me try muting St. Joseph. Let me see if that helps, since you're programming it out. Dr. Dempsey, try talking now.
Hello. Nope. Still echoing.
No, okay.
Now, Danica and I are speaking without an echo. Danica and you are speaking without an echo. But it's you and I, somehow in between you and I. Are we okay now? No. But when I said somehow between you and I, something we were doing.
Okay.
If everyone mutes, can you hear me? Well, if everyone mutes, we're good. And it's 10:05. And I was told we got to be out of here by 10:45 because you guys have something in there at 11. So let's go ahead and get started. And the folks from Pine Knoll, well, maybe they can catch us and maybe they can't. I'd see Donnie Griffin all the time anyway. I'll give her the information. I'm so glad you joined me this morning because I want to take you back to the 4th grade and ask you if you remember how your teachers taught you what the lines were in reading music, what the chords and the notes were in reading music. There are 4 spaces and 5 lines. Do you remember how they taught you? Face, and every good boy does fine. That's how you learn those things. Well, that's kind of a learning key. Has almost nothing to do with anything other than just giving you a way to learn something. And what I do, I as you know, I teach American government at the college, and I talk to the students about many topics. But the topic that I spend the most time on is the Constitution. And I try to give them a way to study the Constitution that will make sense for them. Now, I am afraid, Danica, that people will not be able to say anything to me because I don't hear anything that way. Let's worry about that when the time comes. Okay? So I will talk as much as I can about the learning key that I use in dealing with my students when it comes to understanding the Constitution. And I call it the rule of three. Remember that number? 3. Everybody can count to 3. Every student I've ever had can count to 3. Every student I've ever had at Sandhills, every student I ever had at the College of Charleston, every student I had in my classes at Notre Dame, every student I had in my classes at William and Mary, every student I had in my classes at the University of Massachusetts, they can all count to 3. And if you can count to 3, you can remember a whole lot about the Constitution. The first thing you can remember about the Constitution is how many parts there are to it. Do you know how many parts there are to the Constitution? The answer is 3. That's very good. Very good. Come right, you can move your chair right up to the front of the class. There are 3 parts to the Constitution. The first part you have probably all heard. And I would ask my class, and I would ask you if you had heard of it, but our sound here is not as good as it should be. So I will just tell you what the 3 parts are. The first part is called the preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, provide for the common defense. Let's see, I can't remember it all, but it's right here in my little black book. It's actually my little yellow book. Promote, let's see, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility. That's like you don't fight with your husband. Ensuring domestic tranquility. Provide for the common defense. Promote the general welfare. And secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. To ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. So that's the first part. And most of us learned that in 6th grade, or is that a little too early? Maybe it was 8th grade, or maybe it was 4th grade, depending on what school you went to. We learned that, and we can probably remember the first line and the last line. The lines in the middle are, that's why I have my little cheat sheet here, because I once won a contest in which I had, I guess the prize for winning the contest was I got to deliver the Gettysburg Address at our little town's Memorial Day parade. The parade always finished in the town graveyard, and they always picked a kid each year to do the Gettysburg Address. And I got picked my senior year, and I remember my mother and I sitting at the kitchen table going over the Gettysburg Address 10,000 times. I could recite it in my sleep. And of course, I forgot it when I got in front of all the people in the town. So that's why I keep my little sheets next to me. You never know when you're going to forget the part about from these honored dead anyway. You never know when you're going to forget stuff. But the first part of the Constitution is the preamble. The second part of the Constitution describes how the government is to be organized. What are the powers that each branch will have? What will be each branch's relationship to the other powers, and so forth. There are, I believe there are 6 articles. I could be wrong about that. Let me see here. Article 5, Article 6. I hope that's the end, because then I'll be right. Yep, there are 6 articles of the Constitution. The first three describe our branches of government. How many branches of government do we have? Three. So the first three articles describe our branches of government. The next three articles talk about the relationships between the states and the federal government, talk about the fact that the federal government, the Constitution, is the supreme law of the land. That's important to remember. And say to the people that the powers that are not specifically given to the government in this Constitution are reserved to the states or to the people. That's an important one to remember as well. So there are three parts of the Constitution. First is preamble. Second is the articles themselves. Something going wrong with my phone. Something on my phone. You know, you try to teach a class on Zoom and people try to get you. They don't know you're teaching. So the phone goes off and there's nothing you can do about it. It has to be answered. First part, preamble. Second part, articles. Third part, what? If I've mentioned the preamble and the articles, well, you can't give me an answer, can you? But the third part, and that's the part where the action really is the amendments. The first 10 amendments are called the Bill of Rights. And we could spend the rest of this hour talking about the First Amendment, talking about the first half of the First Amendment, talking about the first half of the first half of the First Amendment. We could easily spend the rest of the hour doing that. But then it's the third part of the Constitution, the amendments. And the amendments are where the real action is. The Bill of Rights, that's important stuff. The Civil War amendments, that's important stuff. How many of you said the Pledge of Allegiance when you went to school every day? Raise your hand if you said the Pledge of Allegiance. Let's say it together. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Liberty and justice for all. The first 10 amendments are about liberty. The 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments, the Civil War amendments, are about justice, with liberty and justice for all. Without the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, there wouldn't be any liberty. And without the Civil War amendments, which say we all have to be treated alike, there wouldn't be any justice. So the three parts: preamble, articles, amendments. Now, in order for the Constitution to be adopted, you got to go back to 1787, which is when the founding fathers got together in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in case you're wondering where Philadelphia is. I don't think they had invented pizza then, so they probably ate almost exclusively scrapple and the other things that people in Philadelphia eat. Cheesesteaks, scrapple and cheesesteaks. They existed on a diet of scrapple and cheesesteaks for the entire summer when they were drafting the Constitution. Now, they had to get it ratified. They had to get it agreed to. There are 13 colonies, and they're trying to make one country out of 13 colonies. The next time you think that's easy, get 13 people together and try to decide on where you want to go for summer vacation. It ain't easy. So they decided that for this thing to be adopted, we had to have 9 people say yes. If only 3 people said it was a good idea, they'd say the hell with it. It's not worth it. But if we can get 9 of our 13 family members to agree that we're going to go to Disneyland or to agree to this particular form of government, then we got something. In order for that to happen, there had to be some compromises made. how many major compromises you think were necessary to get the Constitution adopted? 3. Anytime I ask you the question, how many, the answer is always the same, 3. Now, I'll bet you in the 7th grade, you learned about one of them. Anybody remember learning about something that was called the Great Compromise when the Constitution was being adopted? A compromise between the large states and the small states. You remember that one? Which resulted, they couldn't quite figure that one out. The small states all wanted each state to have 2 votes. The large states wanted to have a number of votes based on the number of people. Both of those made sense because the colonies were independent. Why shouldn't each colony have the same number of votes? And New York would say, well, no, wait a minute. We got more people than all the other colonies put together. Why shouldn't we have more say in this new government? So they came up with a compromise that answered both of them. The House of Representatives, it's based on population. The Senate, every state gets 2 votes. That was the one you read about in the 7th grade. You may not have read about, especially if you went to school in the South, you may not have read about the compromise that was necessary between the slave states and the free states. The Constitution would not have been adopted if the slave states had not voted for it, because there was North Carolina, there was South Carolina, there was Georgia, there was Virginia, there was part of Maryland. These were states in which slavery was the economic order of the day. There were states in the North like Delaware, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Pennsylvania that wanted slavery abolished. If the Constitution had tried to abolish slavery, the Southern states wouldn't have voted for it. If the Constitution had tried to make slavery the law of the land, the Northern states wouldn't have voted for it. So there had to be a compromise between the North and the South, between the non-slaveholding states and the slaveholding states. So the first compromise is big states, little states. Second compromise is slave states, free states. The third compromise was between people who thought the central government ought to have all of the power. People like Alexander Hamilton. You know Alexander Hamilton? How does a bastard, orphan, born in the Caribbean with poverty and squalor, go up to be a hero and a scholar? The $10 founding father without a father. He got where he got by working a lot harder, by being a lot smarter, by being a lot stronger. See, I know my history. I know my Alexander Hamilton because I've seen the play 3 times. I'm crazy about it. Hamilton wanted all the power concentrated in the central government, but people like John Rutledge and others, Patrick Henry, wanted all the government all the power to stay in the states. And so they created a system in which the states and the central government shared power. That system is called federalism. We have a federal system in the United States. For example, the Constitution gives the right to each state to select its senators to the legislature of each state. We just had an election in which Mr. Tillis ran against Mr. What was the guy's name? He lost. Mitch somebody. Lancaster. I think his name was Lancaster. Anyway, we went to the polls and we voted, right? And we voted for Mr. Tillis. He won. In the old days, the state legislature of North Carolina, in the Constitution, the state legislature of North Carolina gets to elect the senators. They would appoint people. It took the 16th Amendment, I believe it's the 16th Amendment, to the Constitution to take the appointment of senators out of the hands of state legislatures and put it in the hands of voters. But the Constitution itself leaves that power in the hands of the states. The Constitution itself gives to the states, the power to elect the president. That's how the Electoral College was born. That's how the Electoral College was born. The states, and think about that. That was a hell of a lot of power that the states had. They could get to send, the state legislatures could get to send people to the Senate, and they could, and I've got it right here. Oh yes, I have it right here. It's like my little Bible. Article 2. Here we go. Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state is entitled, and the electors will select the president. In such manner as the legislature thereof may direct. Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct. Remember that phrase, in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct. What if the legislature in the state of North Carolina decided to send the 15 tallest people, or the 15 people who had given the most money to the Democratic Party, or the 15 people who had been arrested most often for bank robbery or were known adulterers? No reason they can't, because this says, in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct. That's why, by the way, I am opposed to the Electoral College as it exists now. I get in a little trouble for that, but that's because that line is cause for mischief. And if you paid any attention at all to the recent presidential election, the outgoing incumbent tried to get the state of Michigan's legislature to engage in that kind of mischief by thwarting the will of the public and going back and having the state legislature elect the electors. The Constitution does not prohibit that. That could have happened constitutionally. There's no prohibition in the Constitution for the state of Michigan to say, well, it was a close election. It's hard to tell what happened. We're going to send all the electors that are pledged to Donald Trump. Nothing in the Constitution to prevent that. Or they could have said, we'll do it for Joe Biden. Nothing in the Constitution to prevent that. My argument against the Electoral College is not so much the college itself, but how this language in the Constitution creates the possibility for shenanigans and mischief. So, what we're trying to talk about here is the three kinds of amendments we have. Think about the amendments. There have been 27 of them. We got three parts of the Constitution. We got three branches of government. We got three kinds of compromises between the between the states that held slaves, between the states that wanted the power gathered together in Washington, and between the large states and the small states. Three different kinds of compromises. The slave one is the one you don't read much about because we're not particularly proud of the fact, I don't think, that our Constitution permits the importation of slaves. Our Constitution permits, if I'm a slave and I run away from North Carolina all the way to Maine, I'd be in pretty good shape by the time I got there, wouldn't I? But if I ran all the way from North Carolina to Maine and my master from North Carolina came to get me, they have to send me back. That's what the Constitution says. The 14th Amendment to the Constitution and the 13th Amendments to the Constitution, which were adopted after 100 years and only adopted after the Civil War, prohibit that sort of stuff. But the Constitution itself allows it. The Constitution itself permits the importation of slaves. The Constitution itself values a slave not as a whole person when counting up how many people live in a state to provide representation, but they get to be counted as 3/5 of a person. So that's in the Constitution. So when people wave this at me, they say, what about the Founding Fathers? Well, the Founding Fathers were smart. They were terrific, but they were not, they're not infallible. They're not always right. They make mistakes. We all make mistakes. They made some huge ones here, but they did it in order to compromise. Think about that. It's easy to sit here and say, how could they have let that happen? Well, for one thing, James Madison, who was the father of the Constitution, the writer of the Constitution, he was a slave owner. And for another thing, the intellectual force of a lot of the Constitution, Thomas Jefferson, he was a slave owner. So it would be too much to ask of them to create a government that would make their economic way of life illegal. That just doesn't make any sense. And it particularly doesn't make any sense when you know that they needed the 9 states for ratification, and without the southern states, they couldn't get them. So that's important. As I said, the third area of compromise between people like Alexander Hamilton, who could dance very well, and people like Patrick Henry, who were suspicious. Compromise between giving power to the central government or giving power to the states. And the Constitution gives a lot of power to the states. Gives the power to elect the president and the power to elect or to appoint, really, the Senate. That's a lot of power. More power than the states have now. Much more power than the states have now. So we then have the amendments. And the amendments, they're fascinating. And they fall into a number of categories. How many categories do you think the amendments fall into? Let's get our hands up here. 3. There are 3 types of amendments. Some of the amendments give us our basic rights as Americans. When I ask you to recite the Pledge of Allegiance, you recited with liberty and justice for all. The first 4 amendments to the Constitution are talking about liberty. The 14th Amendment to the Constitution talks about justice. So the first purpose of all these amendments is to give us our basic rights as Americans. We have the right to be treated equally. You should not be told that because you're a woman, you can't run for office. You should not be told that because you're a woman, you can't vote. You should not be told that because you're a woman, you can't own property. You should not be told that because you're a woman, you can't go to the United States Naval Academy. You should not be told that because you're a woman, you shouldn't go to the Citadel. You name it, 100 different ways, 100 different issues. The equality based on the 14th Amendment. Just because you have multiple sclerosis doesn't mean that you shouldn't be entitled to a good public school education. And you cannot be turned away from that education because your school doesn't have any elevators and it only has stairs instead of ramps. It is your right to be treated equally. So that school is going to have to install an elevator. That's because of the Americans with Disabilities Act. That is a fundamental right of equality. That comes from the 14th Amendment, which says that no person should be denied the equal protection of the laws. You should not have to go to an inferior school because the color of your skin is black. You should not be denied entry into the United States Military Academy because the color of your skin is black. You should not be denied the right to go in and have a cup of coffee at a lunch counter at Woolworths in Greensboro, North Carolina, because the color of your skin is black. That all goes back to the 14th Amendment. If you want to wear a t-shirt to school with a Confederate flag on it, you have the right to do that. I don't have the right to stop that. Now, if you come to school in an outfit that is so revealing and so sexually suggestive that it makes the people around you uncomfortable, then I can step in. But if what you are expressing is political speech, I have no right to stop it. I enjoy listening to the debates about wearing masks at the Pinehurst Village Council meeting. You all know what I'm talking about. And you all know about the people showing up at the council meeting not wearing masks and talking about the importance that we all have to say what we want to say and express our opinions, not just with voice, but symbolically by not wearing a mask. What do you think those same people would say about the young men who take a knee during the national anthem instead of standing up at attention? I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. They wouldn't like that one bit. Freedom of speech means freedom of speech. If you don't want to wear your mask at the Harris Teeter and run the risk that you'll be tossed out because there's a big sign that says wear a mask, that's your right. But if one of my basketball players decides during the national anthem that he wants to honor fallen Black comrades by taking a knee, I'm okay with that. I got to be honest with you, I'm glad they don't, because it's just one more pain in the butt that I'd have to deal with. But I'm not going to tell a kid not to do that. I would never. I might draw the line at a swastika. I've often thought about this. I like to use the phrase Confederate flag, the battle flag. Kid wears that to school. I might make sure it's tucked in his pants. But I can't stop political speech that I disagree with. And as a public institution, I'm the government. Public colleges have different standards than private colleges, but I don't have the right to stop that. I don't have the right to stop a kid taking a knee during the national anthem. You got to remember what sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. Think about my example of the people who didn't wear masks in that Pinehurst council meeting. What would they think about that Black kid taking a knee? Bet you they wouldn't like it. And I bet you they'd come up with some cockamamie reason why it shouldn't be allowed. It was Justice Jackson who presided over the Nuremberg trial, who said, if there's any North Star in our constellation of American rights, it's the right to free political speech. The government cannot squelch free political speech. And if you're wearing your rebel t-shirt, you have the right to do that. If you're taking a knee during a basketball game, you have that same right. That's the First Amendment. That's the 14th Amendment. So those are the fundamental rights that we have as Americans. That's number one. Number two, let's see how I'm doing for time here. Okay. Number two is a whole bunch of rights that expand the right to vote. The one that I told you about, that used to be the Senate, got appointed by the state legislatures. Now we go and vote. That's an expansion of the right to vote. How many of you know what the 19th Amendment is? This year is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. And it gave you and a couple of others of you the right to vote. Women's suffrage. How many of you know what the 15th Amendment is? Gives the right to vote to freed slaves. How many of you know what the 26th Amendment is? Gives the right to vote to people who are 18 rather than 21. I think it's the 23rd Amendment, abolishes the poll tax. All of these amendments advance the right to vote. That's why it's so disconcerting to see our legislature. This is my humble opinion. This is where we leave fact and go to opinion. Trying to enact legislation that will retard the right to vote. You know, when the Constitution was adopted, you wouldn't have been able to vote for it. You wouldn't have been able to vote for it. You wouldn't have been able to vote for it. You wouldn't have been, nobody that I can see. I know there's a gentleman from Pennsylvania who's just out of my sight line. He and I may be the only ones who would have been able to vote because we were free white males. That's who got to vote. And since then, we have expanded that. Free, 15th Amendment. White, Civil Rights Act of 1964, which, by the way, also grows out of the 14th Amendment. This equal business, it's not just the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's not just the things that make it impossible to deny women their equal rights. It's a civil rights amendment as well. Civil Rights Bill of 1964 the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Both grow out, of course, of the Brown versus the Board of Education school desegregation decision of 1954, but that grows out of the 14th Amendment. Equal protection of the laws. People must be treated equally. So, number one, our fundamental rights, the right to free speech, the right to equal treatment. Number two, expanding the right to vote. But there's a third category that's sort of odd, because the founding, how many amendments are there in the Bill of Rights? Anybody know? 10. 6 of those amendments have to do with a particular group of people in society that probably doesn't include any of us. At least I hope it doesn't include any of us. It's people accused of crimes. The founding fathers spent half of the Bill of Rights talking about the rights of people accused of crimes. Now, if you're like me, you watch enough cop shows to know what Mirandizing somebody is. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, the state will provide one for you. You don't have to say anything. That comes out of a state, a Supreme Court case, Miranda versus Arizona, in which a state trooper in Arizona arrested a guy named Miranda, talked him into confessing, and put him in jail. And Miranda said, geez, I didn't know what I was doing. That went all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court looked at the Fifth Amendment, and it says, let me see what it says here. It says, the Fifth Amendment, oh, these are the articles. What is the matter with me? What is the matter with me? Where is your head, John? No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except cases arriving in land or naval forces. Nor shall a person be subject to the same trial for the same offense twice, put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. The accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district where the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses. The court is saying you can't do that, state trooper. How many of you remember the Fifth Amendment? You have to really be able to remember Bobby Kennedy and Jimmy Hoffa to remember the Fifth Amendment. Bobby Kennedy asking Jimmy Hoffa a whole bunch of questions, and to each one, Jimmy Hoffa would respond, I refuse to answer that question under the rights guaranteed to me by the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. Kennedy would ask 100 questions. Hoffa would claim the fifth 100 times. It's got to be comical. But that's the Fifth Amendment. Unless you're Alex Trebek, you don't have to be subjected to double jeopardy. The Sixth Amendment, you got the right to confront your accused. This is, and I'm running out of time here, but I want to talk about this one because this is a really sticky one on college campuses with sexual assault. See if this doesn't sound reasonable. You are a young woman, a modest young woman from Cameron, North Carolina. You go to Chapel Hill on a Moorhead scholarship. You meet some guy from Charlotte, the big city of Charlotte. He takes you to a party. He gives you a drink that contains something that it shouldn't contain. You wake up, your panties are up around your shoulder. Your private parts are painful, and you discover that you have been violated. Perhaps for the first time in your life. If you are smart, you will report that to the school authorities. And if they are smart, they will report that immediately to the police. I didn't do that at LSU. And that cost a college president's job. It ought to cost a college football coach's job as well. But some things are more important than rape in Louisiana, and one of them is college football. So here you are, little Miss Muffet from Cameron. You've been raped, and you go to the police, and the police say, okay, we'll take your case. We'll arrest this guy. We'll put him on trial. We'll get him convicted, and we'll get him sent away. And you say, do I have to participate in the trial? I am so mortified by this that if I ever saw that man again, it might kill me. And you very sensibly would say, well, we will try to avoid having you to testify. The guy from Charlotte is well connected and has a smart attorney. That attorney goes to court and says, you know, it says here in the Sixth Amendment to the Constitution that my client shall have the right to confront the witnesses against him. Now, if your client is unwilling to testify, you have no case. Whose fault is that? The liberal judge who dismisses the case? The attorney who represents this sleazeball? The young woman who's mortified and afraid to testify? No, it's James Madison's fault. Five of the first 10 amendments about the rights of people accused of crimes. I got a quick story to tell you. I understand I got 5 minutes left. About my fourth year here, we had a young woman who was murdered. One of our nursing students was murdered. She lived in some apartments on Murray Hill Road. I don't know if you know that road. It's the road that goes down by 102.5. It connects 1 and 15501. There's some apartments in there. This woman was murdered. Naturally, our campus, now this is almost 30 years ago. Our campus was mortified. Our campus was distraught. We had memorial services. We had, you know, that they hadn't caught the guy. And the police chief at the time was a man named Gerald Galloway. You may know Gerald. He's very involved in the United Way now. If there's a presentation by the United Way, Gerald's there to do it. He retired a number of years ago. And I was a friend of his. And I went to him and I said, Gerald, I know it's been a year since that murder occurred, and you've not found the perpetrator. I said, I want you to know that we're not going away. That every year on the anniversary of her death, for as long as I am alive, I am going to come to your office And I'm going to say, Gerald, what's the progress? And I did that for about 5 years. I'd go to his office and say, what's the progress? And after 5 years, Gerald said, John, I know you well enough to know that you won't compromise my integrity if I tell you this. We know who committed this crime, but we don't have enough evidence to arrest him because we don't have enough evidence to convict him. If we arrest him, and because of the Seventh Amendment, he'll have the right to trial by jury, and he'll have the right to a speedy trial. We arrest him, he will go to trial before we have collected enough evidence to convict him. And we will eventually get that evidence. But not because of a liberal judge, but because of the Fifth Amendment to this document, we will not be able to try him again if we get that evidence. The next year, I went to see Gerald. He's getting a little tired of me by this time. I said, what's the deal? He said, just hold your horses, cross your fingers. 2 weeks later, I read in the paper that they got the evidence, they arrested the guy. That guy was in fact convicted and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. These protections for the rights of people accused of crimes, I have often thought, tilt the arrow of justice too far in favor of the accused. But then again, I've never been accused, and I don't know what it's like to be like. I'm going to guess that all the police are not as nice as they are on the closer, you know, and maybe these rights and protections are necessary. But it seems odd to me that the founding fathers would devote all of these amendments when they only had, of all the amendments, how many purposes were there? 3. And of all the compromises they needed to get the Constitution adopted, how many were there? 3. And they got the Constitution adopted when they got all these guys to sign the Constitution in a part of the Constitution that's known as the preamble, which is one of how many parts to the Constitution? I wish we could talk more, but we're out of time. You've got an event in there at 11 o'clock. We don't seem to have any audio communication. I would have made it shorter and more interactive if we'd had audio communication, but we don't. So I thank you so very much for your time and attention. The next one of these I'm going to do, I'm not sure when it's up. You have the date?
I have it. April 21st and 22nd, I think, is the
April 21st. I'm going to be talking about race. Karl Marx said that the greatest decision is between management and labor. The rich and the poor. I think we can argue that in the United States, the great divider is between white people and people of color. I'm going to talk about how the Constitution deals with that and how the court has dealt with that over the course of the last, how many years are we in business? 1789, that's 11. 2 more centuries is 211. Add 21, that's 233 years, 232 years. That's a long time to be in business. We got a lot of stuff wrong with us, but we got a lot of stuff right. And we'll talk about how we try to hold it together the next time we meet. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dempsey. Thank you, St. Joseph's.
Bye. See ya.
See ya. Thank you.
Bye.